My name is Naved Singh, and I am the sound designer for Ragtime the Musical.
My name is Darren Levine, and I am the lighting designer for Ragtime.
I'm Lori Gann Smith, and I'm the costume designer for Ragtime.
Hey, I'm Alexis Grigsby, and I'm the assistant costume designer.
I'm Garrett C. Hoff, and I'm the set designer for Ragtime the Musical.
This process began for me probably mid-June, early July. I don't 100% remember when I started on the show, but it's been a 6 to 8 month long process to create and build the show that you all are about to experience. It started with researching New York City, all the locations of this particular production, and really digging into what the time period was, what the locations were, and what the specific lighting qualities are that each of those locations need to communicate to the audience. And once that was complete, we started doing some programming, and we actually pre-programmed the show outside of the theater. And as we move into the theater, we'll then bring that content into the room, see how it actually looks on the humans and on the set that are performing. And it'll turn into the show that you all see at TPAC when we open.
There's a specific moment where there's a few different vehicles that we hear in the play, and I think some of those include an airplane, a train, and a Model T car horn. So to accurately represent those vehicles with sound, I had to basically go through and research exactly what a train would sound like at the turn of the 20th century, and that was really interesting.
Whenever I'm designing costumes, a really big part of my process is research. And for Ragtime, especially since it's set in a historical period that's removed from the contemporary time, then I did a lot of research about that period of time in both the United States and from other countries where immigrants would have been coming to the United States from. So what they would have worn, what kind of political conditions were going on, what were the economic conditions that might influence, what someone might decide is important to bring to the United States when they immigrate. And also the people who were already living in the United States, the African American community here, the robber barons that are included in the production. So lots of research and lots of photographs. Thankfully, there are photographs from this period of time, and so that's super helpful to look at those things, and just sort of like that really influences what I decide to put people in costume-wise.
So the research, it's kind of fun digging around online because you kind of start out with the things that that maybe are your first Google searches. But then if you go to Pinterest or something like that, you can sometimes find photo albums from people, I guess, like that have a direct interest in these old histories and stuff. So it was kind of fun just like digging and just seeing like realistic day-to-day photos of people's lives at the time. And with the immigrants, I would find also photos of like people living in that country at the time, because obviously they're just wearing what they came in. So yeah, it was fun.
Ragtime is a really huge, epic type of show. So right from the beginning, I had to think about it in terms of how to make such a large production fill the stage at Polk Theater, but also how to create all the individual scenes that are in Ragtime. So what I did was decided to go with an overall look for the show. So there's an overall design look for the show, which is a very kind of steel, turn of the century, industrial revolution kind of feel for it. Looks kind of like bridges or like, some steel work with bridges and levels and staircases that'll be there the whole time. And then there's a lot of little bitty scenes, so each individual scene will have 1 or 2 or 3 small pieces that will give the audience the idea of the place without actually having to create it, because we really just don't have the space to create a scene for every single scene in the show. There are so many of them. So really it's going to be like finding that really specific thing that will talk about that specific scene. For instance, it might just be furniture. It might just be a rolling door. It might be a little garden unit. But it just to set the scene for every single little scene in the big space of the entire look of the show. So that's kind of the concept we went with for this production. So there'll be a lot of small pieces that come on and off by the actors, but the large visual of the show will be there through the entire thing.
Ragtime is a show that I've been aware of and really enjoyed the music to for the past, 20, 25 years. I first was introduced to the show just via ragtime music, and I'm actually from an area where one of the greatest ragtime pianists, Scott Joplin, resided for a while. I'm from just outside Sedalia, Missouri, and that's where he wrote probably one of the most famous ragtime tunes in the entire world, which was the Maple Leaf Rag. And I have great memories of going along with my parents to the Ragtime Festival that's still held to this day in Sedalia, Missouri, that honors his legacy, but also the legacy of the entire genre. So it's great for me to be drawing on a lot of those childhood memories and a lot of what I grew to love about the music that's present in this show, and get to work on it and bring it to stage.
It was a really interesting design process because it is set at the turn of the 20th century. So every element that I added had to be the 1904 version of that, be that a car horn or a train or a doorbell. So that was a really interesting part of the process, was pulling these period pieces through the sound effects, basically. And another really interesting part of the process was that with 35 actors in mics coming on and off stage, we had to do a lot of pre-programming of the soundboard in a way that we don't normally do, but we really needed to with this many actors.
Oh, Ragtime is the most fascinating show. I've loved it since it first opened. I think it's just fascinating to look at three separate groups and how they respond to a time in history that everything started to change. We have the established white, rich group that is not very happy about the changes that are happening. We have the African American group that is is showing this new, exciting movement forward. There's great hope, there's great joy, and we kind of see where that goes. And then we have the immigrants that are coming into the country that are filled with hope and joy and wanting to become the American dream. And we see how all that kind of happens and how that is kind of the same thing that's happening now. It's very similar to a lot of the stories and the events that are happening now. What is happening with the established white community and how are they dealing with change? What is happening with the African American community who's saying we deserve rights, we deserve the same kind of experience and opportunities that everybody else does, and the immigrant community that have become a bad word, that how dare these immigrants come in. Well, it was the same thing in the turn of the century. How did they deal with those, and how did they become successful? So I think it's just a fascinating musical that talks a lot about what's happening today, but in a way that's in a period and in a really fascinating time.
It's really interesting because I do like, I'm kind of an ancestry nut, and I like to get on Ancestry.com and look at things and documents from, in my family's history and also my husband's family's history. My ancestors have been here a long, long time, but my husband's ancestors were relatively recent immigrants from Scotland. And so it's interesting to think about how those people made the decision, why they made the decision that America would be a better place for them, and just to look back and see how things have evolved over time. For some of the people in the show, some of the characters, this is like the beginning for them of something new. But for other characters, it's a continuation of things. And I think that's one of the things that's important about the show, is looking at the things that have changed and the things that have stayed the same and what the significance of those things are.